On a war-torn battlefield, a warrior lies broken, betrayed by her own people, left to die. With her armor shattered and her strength fading, she faces an enemy she never expected: abandonment. But just as death seems certain, a human soldier steps into the smoke, offering mercy where none exists. What makes him spare her life? And what will she do now, stranded between the loyalty she once swore and a future she never imagined? Survival is no longer just about fighting. It's about choosing who she becomes. But can she trust the one who saved her, or will her past come back to destroy them both? Stay tuned to find out. If you're new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Lyra Ilara lay in the dirt, struggling to breathe. The thick gray clouds above swirled in the sky, casting a dim, lifeless glow over the battlefield. The ground beneath her was soaked with mud and blood, a cruel mixture of rain and the fallen. Her body ached, her armor shattered, and her limbs felt heavy, like they no longer belonged to her. Pain flared through her ribs as she tried to move, but it was a futile effort. A deep wound ran along her side, and her left arm was completely useless. She could barely feel it anymore. Once her armor had been the pride of a Zalar warrior, black and silver, gleaming under the harsh light of battle. Now it was cracked and broken, just like her spirit. Lyra had fought hard. She had done her duty. But in the end, it was not the enemy that defeated her. It was her own people. The battle had been fierce. The Zalar had charged against the humans, with everything they had, tearing through their defenses. They stormed the ruined city, burned their camps, and their victory had seemed inevitable. But then, everything changed. The human reinforcements arrived. Explosions rocked the battlefield, turning the ground into fire and death. Buildings crumbled, the earth split open, and chaos consumed them all. Lyra had been hit hard, thrown against a pile of rubble. She tried to rise, but her strength had already left her. Everything felt blurry, the world spinning. When she woke again, her captain, Grathos, stood above her. Relief had washed over her, but it didn't last long. Something was wrong. In Grathos's cold yellow eyes, she saw not concern, not duty, but disgust. "Unfit for battle," he had muttered. The words echoed in her mind, each one a sharp sting. She tried to rise, to plead for help, but her legs failed her. "Help me," she whispered, reaching out with a trembling hand. But Grathos only sneered at her. "Survival of the strongest," he said. "The weak have no place in the Dominion." The words hit her like a physical blow. He turned away from her, and one by one the other Zalar soldiers followed him, none of them looking back. None of them offered a hand. They left her to die, abandoned, alone. She could only watch as they walked away, their forms growing smaller, in the distance. The Great Dominion, the empire that had raised her, trained her, taught her to be a warrior, had thrown her away like trash. Lyra clenched her teeth, rage boiling in her chest. She would not die here. She would not let their betrayal be the end of her. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps, each one a battle in itself. A sound echoed through the battlefield. Distant, at first, but growing closer. Footsteps. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest. Humans. She forced her broken body to move, dragging herself toward the nearest wreckage for cover, but her strength was fading fast. She could barely lift herself. The footsteps grew louder. Heavy boots, the unmistakable sound of someone in armor. A shadow moved through the smoke and dust. A human figure, tall and broad-shouldered, carrying a rifle. Lyra's breath hitched. She knew what came next. Execution. Humans did not take Zalar prisoners. Her people had made sure of that. Zalar warriors never surrendered, never showed mercy. The humans had learned to return that cruelty in kind. She braced herself for the end. She was ready to face death head-on, to die with honor, like any true warrior. But then, something unexpected happened. The human stepped into view. He wore battle-scarred armor, his helmet obscuring most of his face, but his dark eyes were visible, scanning the battlefield. There was something different in his gaze, something that didn't quite fit. He didn't raise his rifle. He didn't fire. Instead, he lowered it, looking at her, confused, almost hesitant. Lyra couldn't believe what she was seeing. Was this a trick? Was he waiting for her to make a move? Humans were killers, just like her own kind. They had been trained to see the Zaylor as enemies, to show no mercy. Yet here was this soldier, a human, standing before her, weapon lowered. She blinked, confused. What was this? No human would show mercy to someone like her, especially not after everything her people had done to them. But this soldier, he was different. He wasn't like the others. The human stepped closer, his expression hardening, as though he was struggling with something. He knelt beside her. Lyra flinched, but she didn't pull away. Even though she was weak, even though she could barely move, she would not show fear. She would not let him see her fear. "Do it," she spat, her voice rough from the pain. "End it." But he didn't respond. Instead, he reached out his hand. Lyra froze. This was impossible. No human would offer mercy. No Zaylor would accept it. Her pride screamed at her to refuse, to lash out, to reject his offer. But her body was broken. Her people had abandoned her. She had nothing left. With trembling hands, she took his. It was the first time in her life that she had ever let go of her pride, ever allowed herself to accept help. The darkness took her, then, and everything faded away. When she woke, she was no longer in the middle of the battlefield. The sounds of war had faded into the distance. The only thing she could hear was the crackling of a fire. Lyra blinked, disoriented. Her body ached, every movement sending sharp spikes of pain through her. But she was alive. And the human, the one who had spared her, was sitting nearby, watching her quietly. She stared at him, unsure of what to feel. He had saved her. But why? What did he want? And what was this strange feeling building inside her? Trust? No. She couldn't trust a human. Not yet. But maybe, just maybe, this human soldier was different. The journey ahead would be long, filled with challenges. But for the first time, Lyra felt a glimmer of hope. Not from the Dominion, not from her people, but from a stranger who had given her a chance to live. And perhaps, just perhaps, that was enough to start something new. Lyra slowly opened her eyes, the light from the flickering fire casting shadows on the metal walls of what appeared to be a collapsed building. Her body ached, and every breath she took was like fire against her ribs. She was alive, but she didn't understand why. The last thing she remembered was the human soldier's hand, his warm grip pulling her from the clutches of death. Her mind swirled with confusion. Why hadn't he killed her? Humans were enemies. They were merciless, just like the Zaylor warriors. Yet here she was, alive and in a place of safety, a place she couldn't fully trust. The scent of burning metal filled the air, mixed with the musty smell of wet earth. The sound of distant explosions, muffled by the walls around her, echoed. In the back of her mind, Lyra shifted slightly, regretting the movement immediately. Pain surged through her side and she groaned softly. She glanced down at herself. Her armor was gone, replaced with the rough underlayer of her combat suit, and there were crude bandages wrapped tightly around her ribs. She looked over to the side. There, sitting a few feet away, was the human soldier. His rifle rested across his lap and his gaze was fixed on the fire. He didn't look like a hero. His face was rough and worn, his dark eyes filled with the kind of weariness that only war could bring. He had taken off his helmet, revealing short, sweaty hair streaked with dust. His expression was unreadable, but there was something about him that made Lyra uneasy. Was he truly trying to help her, or was he waiting for the right moment to strike? She shifted again, trying to push herself up, but the pain in her body stopped her. She clenched her jaw, determined not to show any weakness. Humans had never shown mercy to her kind before. Yet this one, this strange soldier, had done the impossible. He had saved her life. "You're awake," the human said, his voice rough but calm. It was the first time he had spoken since she had woken up. Lyra narrowed her eyes, still suspicious, but she did not respond. She wasn't going to make it easy for him. "Why didn't you kill me?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Her words hung in the air, sharp with distrust. She was expecting a cruel answer, something to confirm her worst fears. Humans were cold, calculating killers. Why would this one be any different? The human didn't answer immediately. He rubbed a hand over his face as though the question had caught him off guard. After a long pause, he let out a slow breath. "That's a good question," he said, his voice quieter now, almost thoughtful. Lyra studied him, trying to make sense of this soldier. His expression wasn't one of fear, nor was it one of triumph. There was something else in his eyes, something she couldn't quite understand. It wasn't pity. It wasn't hatred. It was something deeper. "Why?" she repeated, this time more firmly. "Humans don't show mercy, not to people like me." The human's gaze softened just a little, but he didn't answer. Instead, he shifted slightly, his hand reaching into a pouch at his side. He pulled out something wrapped in silver packaging and tossed it toward her. The package landed near her, just out of reach, but she could smell it, the faint scent of food. Lyra's stomach growled at the thought, but she ignored it. "Poison?" she asked flatly, suspicion still clouding her mind. The human snorted, his lips twitching with amusement. "Yeah, I saved your life just to poison you with a protein bar." Lyra eyed the package carefully, still unsure if she should trust him. But the hunger inside her was growing stronger by the second. Her last meal had been before the battle, and her body was telling her that she needed to eat. She slowly picked up the package, unwrapping it cautiously. The scent was strange, grainy, and synthetic, but it was food, and it was all she had. With a sigh, she bit into it, forcing herself to chew despite the dry, unpleasant texture. She swallowed hard, trying not to gag. It wasn't great, but it was sustenance. The human watched her with mild amusement as she ate, clearly expecting her to complain. "Not to your taste?" he asked, his voice tinged with amusement. "It's disgusting," Lyra muttered, but she finished it, ignoring the dryness in her mouth. The human chuckled. "Welcome to human rations," he said, shaking his head. Despite the harshness of the food, Lyra appreciated the small kindness. It wasn't much, but it was more than she had expected from anyone, especially a human. Her mind raced as she sat there trying to make sense of everything. Why had this man saved her? What did he want from her? As the minutes passed, Lyra found herself growing more and more frustrated. She couldn't understand why this soldier, this human, had decided to spare her. He wasn't bound by any rules of honor or duty, and yet he had chosen to help her. It didn't make sense. "Where are the others?" she asked, breaking the silence. She needed to know if any of her people were alive. The human's face darkened. "Dead or scattered," he replied simply. Lyra frowned. If he was alone, then he had no reason to keep her alive, no orders, no witnesses, just his own choice. She didn't know what to make of that. "You regret it?" she asked, her voice low. She had to know. Was he simply saving her out of some misplaced sense of mercy? Or was there something more to it? The human didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. He stared into the fire, the shadows deepening around him. "Not yet," he said finally, his voice soft. Lyra didn't know what to say to that. She had expected cruelty. She had expected punishment. But this man, this human, was different. He wasn't acting out of duty or out of revenge. He was acting out of something else, something that Lyra couldn't name. "You're a fool," she muttered, her voice harsh. The human chuckled. "Probably," he said, though his voice lacked bitterness. "But maybe not as much as you think." Silence fell between them once again. Lyra didn't know what to make of him. She didn't know if she could trust him. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel completely alone. As the fire crackled softly between them, she realized something. Survival was no longer just about fighting. It was about choice, and for the first time, Lyra began to wonder what would happen if she started making her own choices. This human had shown her mercy, and in doing so, he had forced her to question everything she had ever believed. It was a painful, terrifying thing, but it was also the beginning of something new. She just didn't know what yet. For now, though, she would survive. And maybe, just maybe, she would start to understand the human who had saved her life. The days following her rescue blurred together. Lyra couldn't remember much about how she ended up in the shelter where the human, Jackson Hale, had left her to recover. The pain in her side had subsided to a dull throb, but the confusion in her mind only grew stronger. She wasn't sure if it was the hunger gnawing at her or the weight of her thoughts that kept her awake at night. Her mind kept returning to her people. The Dominion. How could she have been abandoned by them? Grathos, her captain, had left her to die. He hadn't even cared enough to end her suffering. He had let her bleed out on that battlefield, betrayed by the very people she had fought so fiercely for. The thought burned in her chest, filling her with a mix of anger and disbelief. They had taught her to fight, to follow orders without question, to believe in the strength of the Dominion above all else. And now she was left alone, abandoned by them. "You look lost in thought." Jackson's voice broke through her spiraling thoughts. She had been staring at the ground for what felt like hours, her mind a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. Lyra looked up at him, his figure barely visible in the flickering firelight. He had his back to her, cleaning his rifle with practiced precision. His movements were calm, deliberate, almost like he was in control of everything around him. Lyra, on the other hand, felt like a piece of debris caught in a storm, helpless and out of place. "Just thinking," she replied, her voice low. It wasn't a lie, but it wasn't the full truth either. She wasn't just thinking. She was wrestling with a storm inside her, one that she couldn't escape. "About what?" Jackson asked, not looking at her. It was almost like he already knew what was on her mind, but he was waiting for her to say it. Lyra hesitated. Part of her wanted to ask him why he had saved her, why he had gone against everything he had been taught about her kind. But that question, for some reason, felt too personal, too raw. Instead, she found herself asking something else. "How do you live with it?" she said. "How do you live with fighting for a cause and then realizing it was all wrong?" Jackson's fingers stopped moving on the rifle. There was a brief silence before he set it down and turned to face her. His eyes met hers, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something in them that wasn't hard or cold. There was a hint of sadness, perhaps even regret. "You stop thinking about it," he said quietly. "You keep moving forward. You keep fighting because that's all you know. But eventually you start asking yourself if it's worth it, if the fight is really for something you believe in, or if you're just fighting because it's what you've been taught to do." Lyra's heart clenched. His words hit her harder than she expected. She had been trained to believe that the Dominion was invincible, that their strength was unmatched. But now, in the face of betrayal, in the face of the truth that had been thrust upon her, she didn't know what she believed anymore. "So you just let go?" she asked, her voice almost a whisper. "You let go of everything you've ever known?" Jackson's gaze softened. "Sometimes you don't have a choice. Sometimes letting go is the only way you can survive." Lyra looked down at her hands, flexing her claws. The familiar weight of her warrior's pride was still there, buried deep inside her. She had been raised to uphold the laws of the Dominion, to follow the chain of command without question. But now, after everything that had happened, she wasn't sure if any of it mattered anymore. The Dominion had abandoned her. Her commander, her comrades, had left her to die. She had fought for them, killed for them, and in return, they had shown her nothing but disdain. The pain in her side flared up and she winced, clutching her ribs. She had to keep moving. She had to keep fighting. That's what she had always been told. But now, with every step she took, the weight of her past felt heavier. Her loyalty to the Dominion was eroding, replaced by a feeling of emptiness. The cause she had once fought for seemed like a distant memory, like something that had never truly been hers. What happens when you have nothing left to believe in? Lyra asked, the question slipping from her lips before she could stop it. You find something else to believe in, Jackson replied softly. You find something that matters, even if it's just surviving for one more day, or helping someone who needs it. Lyra's thoughts shifted back to her people, to the dominion she had once believed in. They had left her to die, and yet here she was, alive because of a human, someone she had been taught to see as an enemy. The contrast was maddening. How could they have left her? How could she have been so blind, so loyal to a cause that saw her as nothing more than a tool to be discarded when it was no longer useful? She glanced at Jackson again. He was watching her, his face unreadable, but there was something in his eyes that made her wonder, something that made her question whether loyalty to her past was truly worth holding on to. You think I'm a fool, don't you? She said suddenly. Her words came out sharper than she meant them to, but she didn't care. No, Jackson said, shaking his head slowly. I think you're lost, just like the rest of us. Lyra swallowed, the knot in her throat tightening. Lost. That's what she felt like. Lost and alone in a world that no longer made sense. Maybe I am, she murmured. The silence between them grew, filled only by the crackling of the fire and the distant sounds of battle. Lyra's mind was a battlefield of its own, torn between the loyalty she had been raised with and the new path that Jackson seemed to be offering her. But could she trust him? Could she trust herself? You're not alone, Jackson said after a long pause, his voice low but steady. Not anymore. Lyra looked up at him, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never felt more conflicted in her life. But for the first time, she didn't feel completely abandoned. The war was far from over. The Dominion would come for her. And when they did, Lyra knew she would have to make a choice. But for now, she was still alive. And for the first time in a long while, she wondered if survival could mean something more than just fighting. The air around them was thick with tension as Lyra and Jackson crouched behind the wreckage, their eyes scanning the horizon. The sound of distant gunfire echoed in the air, reminding them that the battle was far from over. Lyra's heart raced in her chest. She had fought in countless battles before, but this one felt different. This time, it wasn't just her survival that was at stake. It was her soul. The Dominion had cast her aside, leaving her to die on the battlefield. Grathos, her commander, had turned his back on her without a second thought. The loyalty she had once sworn to the Dominion was now nothing more than a broken memory. Everything she had believed in, everything she had fought for, was in ruins. The Dominion had betrayed her, and now she was left with nothing but the wreckage of her past. But Jackson, the human who had saved her life, had shown her something different. He had shown her mercy when she expected nothing but death. He had treated her like a person, not an enemy. And for the first time in her life, Lyra began to question everything she had ever been taught. Could there be more to life than just fighting? Could there be a way to move forward, to rebuild, to find something worth fighting for again? What now? Lyra asked quietly, her voice low with uncertainty. Jackson looked at her, his expression hard, yet there was a flicker of something softer in his eyes. Now we survive, he said. We fight for our lives, for something better. Lyra's mind swirled with the weight of his words. She had always been told that survival was the ultimate goal, that the strong should rise above all else. But Jackson's words made her wonder if survival could mean more than just living to fight another day. Could there be redemption in survival? Could she find a way to rebuild her life? To find a new purpose beyond the war that had consumed her for so long? The wind howled through the ruins, carrying with it the distant sounds of battle. The Zahler soldiers, her former comrades, were closing in. Lyra could feel the weight of their presence, their discipline, their unrelenting pursuit. They wouldn't stop until they had eradicated every last trace of weakness, every last survivor, and Lyra knew she was marked as one of them. They'll come for me, she murmured almost to herself. They'll never let me live. Jackson's gaze hardened. Then we'll make sure they don't catch us. Lyra nodded slowly. She didn't have a plan. She didn't know what to do next. But she knew she couldn't go back. She couldn't return to the Dominion, not after what they had done to her. She couldn't go back to the people who had abandoned her. But that left her with no place to go, no home to return to. She was a warrior without a cause, a soldier without an army. I don't belong with the humans, she said quietly, her voice tinged with bitterness. I'm not one of you. You're not one of them either, Jackson said, his voice steady. You don't belong with the Dominion anymore. Lyra's heart clenched at his words. It was true. She didn't belong with the Dominion. She didn't belong with the people who had raised her, who had taught her to fight, to kill, to follow orders without question. But that didn't make her feel any less lost. She had spent her whole life fighting for something she believed in, only to discover that the very thing she had fought for had abandoned her when she was no longer useful. What am I supposed to do now? She asked, her voice small, almost desperate. I've lost everything. I don't even know who I am anymore. You find something new, Jackson said, his voice calm and reassuring. You find a new path, a path that's yours to choose. Lyra looked at him, searching his eyes for some sign of doubt, some hint of uncertainty. But there was none. Jackson believed what he said. He had given her a chance when no one else would. He had saved her life, and now he was telling her that there was a future, a path she could walk, even after everything she had lost. I don't know if I can, Lyra whispered, her voice barely audible. I don't know if I can trust anyone again. You don't have to trust anyone right now, Jackson said, his tone soft but firm. You just have to trust yourself. Trust that you can make it through this. Trust that you can survive. Lyra took a deep breath, trying to calm the storm that raged inside her. She had always relied on her strength, on her ability to fight. But now, as the sound of approaching soldiers grew louder, she realized that strength alone might not be enough. She needed something more. She needed hope. So, what's the next step? She asked, her voice steadier now. We move, Jackson said. We don't look back. We keep going forward. Lyra glanced at the distant horizon, where the last remnants of daylight were fading into the night. The battlefield stretched before her, littered with the remains of both Zaylor and human soldiers. The war was far from over, but for the first time, Lyra felt a sense of clarity. She wasn't fighting for the Dominion anymore. She wasn't fighting for anyone but herself. All right, she said, her voice firm with resolve. Let's go. They stood together, facing the uncertain future ahead. Lyra's heart pounded in her chest, but this time it wasn't with fear. It was with the raw determination to survive, to build something new from the ashes of her past. As they moved through the wreckage, the weight of her past hung heavy on her shoulders, but she no longer felt completely lost. There was a new path ahead of her, a path of redemption, of survival, of finding her own way. And for the first time, Lyra believed that maybe, just maybe, she could build a future worth fighting for.